It is impeccable timing, really. Couldn't be more impeccable since Karadžić actually appeared in court this afternoon. For any of you who missed the news, he shaved off his big white Father Christmas beard, and he said that he'd been kidnapped and he feared for his life and he wasn't going to enter a plea for 30 days. So already it's looking like the trial he's going to try and string out. I was in The Hague. I actually went there yesterday. Well, I was there last week when he was first captured, and I went yesterday, and I was outside the tribunal. We were interviewing Larry Hollingworth, who some of you who followed the Bosnian War may remember was a big, he was in charge of the UN relief operations, a guy with white hair, big white beard. And I was standing outside the UN War Crimes Tribunal interviewing this guy all day, and all these Dutch people were looking at me thinking, is that Karadžić? I actually did interview Karadžić very shortly after he'd been indicted back in November '95, I think it was, which we showed last week on BBC News. And I looked about 12. And it was just to kind of brought back to me how long it is that he's been on the run, 13 years. It feels like an absolute lifetime ago, and I'm sure it will for most of my panel. What I want to do tonight with my guests, who I will introduce in just a moment, is partly to look ahead to the trials, the Karadžić trial. How long is it going to last? To what extent is he going to string it out? To what extent will the tribunal try and stop that happening? Stop a repeat of the Milosevic trial, which you may well know went on for 4 years, and there was never any verdict because he died in custody. How important is it for international justice that he's been caught and that this trial goes smoothly? How guilty do we think he is? How easy will it be to prove these charges? It's one thing listing all these charges of genocide and war crimes. How easy will it be for the tribunal to actually prove it? And then to look back at what happened in Bosnia. I think we were saying just before we came up here, it's very easy to assume everybody lived through Bosnia as we did, remembers its ins and outs, but actually young people who are in their 20s don't really remember it. So we're going to refresh your memories, those youngsters amongst us tonight. Let's introduce our panel. Ed Viliami from the Guardian and Observer newspaper, one of the most distinguished journalists in this country, I think it's fair to say. Author, if you haven't read it, of Seasons in Hell, a fantastic book, which is possibly the seminal book on Bosnia and understanding Bosnia's war. Reported, I don't know how much, pretty much all the time during the Bosnian War, didn't you, Ed? But most famously for visiting the detention camps, Amasca, and Ed's account of that really absolutely seminal. So we're very glad to have Ed here, and he's just been back getting reaction in Bosnia to the Karadžić arrest, and so we'll want to hear all of that. Kemal Pervanic, who was in the camps, Bosnian refugee who arrived here in the UK at the beginning of '93, so about 15 years ago. But Kemal survived 7 months in Amasca and after that Mladić camps. When he came to London, he escaped to London, he won a place at university, and he too has written a very seminal book on Bosnia called The Killing Days, which if you haven't read it is an absolutely haunting and amazing book. His own record of what happened there. Very pleased to say we have Sir Geoffrey Nice, QC, one of Britain's leading barristers, who is, importantly, was the lead prosecutor at the trial of Slobodan Milosevic. Even more importantly, went to the same Oxford College as I did. So there you go. We stick together. And has led on several key cases at the War Crimes Tribunal as well, including the Bosnian co-actor Dario Kordic, who was subsequently jailed for 25 years. And he, I hope, is going to help us go through the legal niceties, if that's not a pun, of what's going to be happening at The Hague. And joining us on the line from Belgrade, and I hope Gordana can hear us, is Gordana Igoric, who began her career as a journalist in Belgrade in 1981, reported from Bosnia and Kosovo during the wars that followed, and return there to research and document war crimes. She's founder of the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network and is currently serving as the Regional Network Director there. So she's going to give us the perspective from Serbia itself, and I'm very pleased that Gordana can join us tonight as well. So let's crack on and start, as I say, by just looking ahead before we look back and talk about the trial since Karadžić actually appeared today, minus the beard, looking a little bit more like his old self. So Geoffrey Nice, is this trial, I was talking to one of your colleagues, one of the barristers out there in The Hague, who said he thought this trial would drag on for 3 years. That was his best guess. What's your best guess?
They'll be disappointed if they don't finish it in a year.
A year, you think? But Milošević went on for 4 years.
No, it didn't. The Milošević trial lasted 2 full years. It seemed to last 4 years because we sat 4 hours a day for 3 days a week on the weeks when we weren't not sitting at all because he was ill. If you read the Human Rights Watch report, which does a neutral analysis of the time that the trial took, it was an extremely efficient trial, and in Western court days would have lasted about 2 years. The Milošević trial covers 3 wars and 10 years. The Karadžić trial covers 3 years and 1 war, and probably contains stronger evidence as against him than we had as direct evidence against Milošević. It's been very well prepared, has the advantage of all the economies that earlier trials have made available through procedural change, and I should think they'd be pretty disappointed if they don't finish the trial in a year.
Okay. How important is it to the tribunal to make sure that it is pretty quick? Because the tribunal's been hugely criticised for allowing Milošević to drag on and ultimately without a verdict.
Wrongly, for the reasons I've just given, and I can come back and defend the Milošević judges if you want me to. Is this an important trial? Of course it is. It's an extremely important trial, and it gives the tribunal the opportunity of recovering its reputation, which for whatever reasons, good or bad, has fallen. But really, most interesting to me in today's appearance by Karadžić was that he identified the continuing underlying issue that we forget about. Because he said, oh, there was a deal with Holbrooke. We don't know how far he's going to go in saying that there was a deal. But if there was a deal, just think about that. If there was a deal that he would not be arrested because it was in the greater interest that there should be political peace, does that remain a tenable position? It's after all the same position that's being taken by or on behalf of Bashir in respect to the Sudan, where they're pressing for a deferral of the ICC intervention. And you shouldn't assume that these ad hoc and other international courts are there for good, or that they have supremacy. They are still in partnership with political process. And so it'll be very interesting in this trial to see if Karadžić is able to get any mileage out of the fact, if he's able to establish it, that there was an agreement with Karadžić. Assuming that he doesn't manage to stop the trial for that reason, and I think it's pretty unlikely that he would succeed in that, the trial's enormously important because of what it will show about the process of genocide, if genocide was committed, and about the gravest of crimes that were committed. But if they enlarge the indictment, and they have to enlarge the indictment, not narrow it, because at the moment the indictment doesn't track back to Belgrade and to Milošević, if they enlarge it as they should to incorporate the responsibility of Belgrade in what happened in Bosnia, you'll not only have a fuller picture of what happened in Belgrade and the way in which Belgrade contributed to the environment in which genocide came to be committed, if it was genocide, but there will be reason to explore the involvement of the West, if there was involvement of the West, by negligence, consent, or encouragement in, for example, the taking of Srebrenica. So this trial is important in many ways and at various levels. But only if it's done properly.
Right. Ed Viliami, to what extent do you think Karadžić is going to grandstand in this trial, just use the dock as a soapbox in a way that Milosevic did at times?
Well, as Geoffrey said, I don't recognise him.
Of course not.
If he's clever, it's not just the 13 years that he's been fugitive, indulged,
not caught, protected by, it remains to be seen, or by what or who. It's the 3 years before that as well, and this, he can either grandstand if he wants to, but if he's clever, he'll remember the 3 years before the indictment in 95, during which, I mean, you know, I met him in 1992, before we sort of a mixture of stumbled and struggled our way into an infernal place called Omarska, which Gamal will talk about. But that was only the outset. That was the beginning. You know, we talk a lot in this room about the power of the media. I didn't feel much power as it went from the expose of the concentration camps and the world's shocked reaction through mass rape, think about that from the inside, mass deportation, the incineration of villages, 3 years of peace plans, and all the people who now shout war criminal, well, not all, sorry, a few of them, were shaking his hand under the chandeliers. Another map, another goddamn promise, and in private. They were derisive of this ride with which they were taking these people. So if he's, well, we can name names, why not? I can on paper, I will here. If he's clever, he will call David Owen, Richard Holbrooke, Lord Peter Carrington, Cyrus Vance, Dame Pauline Neville-Jones, indeed, and he will ask them what they told him. And what the world told him, he can now tell the world. Because it was 3 effing years between the camps and the massacre at Srebrenica. And what happened during those 3 years, he and Mladić had free rein to carry out and took advantage of that. If he's clever, that's what he'll do. What he did, we can talk about later.
Kamal, when you, I don't know if you saw him in the dock today, I mean, as allegedly one of his victims, what's your reaction when you saw him in the dock?
Tired. I'm feeling tired. See, like so many others, I waited for 12, 13 years, and when it happened, I didn't feel any joy. I just thought it was about bloody time to happen. I feel some of it is a joke. It's, and
why
when
is he a joke?
Well, the whole thing, not just Karadžić, the way, you know, things, the way nothing was done for 12 years. And when I hear all this legal stuff, I understand some of it, but my head wants to explode. It's, you see, it's quite interesting. When I was in school, they taught us about genocide, and when I read what constitutes genocide, I thought, my God, this is my life. This is what happened to me. And genocide didn't take place in Srebrenica in 95. It took place in 1992, most of it. And most people were killed. If you follow events from April 92, the same pattern repeated itself in every single town until Karadžić and his henchmen realized it wasn't good for the world to see those images. I'm saying all of this because we've had several cases where people under Karadžić have been convicted of genocide, and he presided over those events, over this project. So, speaking as not as someone who suffered because of Karadžić, but as a lay person, for me, there's an overwhelming body of evidence to convict this man. And I've been saying these days, it's least about myself. I can't speak for other, whatever we named them, because this man has committed crimes against humanity, not just against myself. And this is about upholding the rule of law. And you know, this man, together with some other people around him, took law into his own hands, and 100,000 people died. And okay. he should, I believe he should get a fair trial. I don't think he should make the mockery of the Hague Tribunal the way Milošević had done. Some years back I was criticized for saying that I supported the tribunal fully, but there was nothing else. So I had to give it my full support. But in my eyes, the tribunal has lost some of its reputation during the Milošević trial. I don't think he should be allowed to defend himself. I don't think this trial should drag on for the next 5 years or so. If there's no evidence to convict him, let him go free.
All right, for the moment, thank you. Gordana Igoric in Belgrade, I hope you can hear me okay. I think what a lot of people in The Hague were saying Good. A lot of people in The Hague were saying that without Mladić, this trial is not complete. What do you think are the chances of Ratko Mladić being captured, apprehended, as well as Karadžić?
Yeah. I'm now quite optimistic about that. It seems that the change of the government, the new ruling coalition, already did give some results, quite an important Karadžić arrest. And I really don't see any big obstacles now to move and do something about Mladić, especially because we have now new Secret Service chief. So the place is now basically belonging to Democratic ruling party, which means then that the nationalistic influence is seriously reduced from that service. The service is not definitely reformed, but at least we can say it is going to be. And I don't think that anyone would doubt that Secret Service of Serbia was, or some elements of that, are involved in hiding and protecting Karadžić and Mladić. So, new government, old nationalists, Koštunica's party, they're out of power, and you could see how their position is weakening. They had an organized rally here in Belgrade, which was quite disappointing to the point of view, about 10,000 people, just kind of football fans throwing some windows, but in reality far from what they expected to have. And it's actually mode that really nothing happens once you do it. So I don't see what really can now stop the government arresting Mladić.
Can I ask you, how do you think that Karadžić managed to evade capture for those 13 years? And what was it that suddenly changed that allowed him to be captured?
Yeah, I thought that was quite clear. I mean, we have to understand that since 2000 we had this Karadžić government, but again in coalition with the Democratic Party of Serbia government, and not to go to your presence there, but it was always like having two opposing parties in one ruling coalition. That was quite impossible to do, and always military, security, or secret service were controlled by nationalists. And that was the crucial thing. Karadžić enjoyed, obviously, and Mladić for sure, support by some fractions of military and secret service police. So now, when these elections are over and the new government is there is no any other influence that can come. Of course, there are some influences still, apart from that it is over the battle, but definitely that was the reason. Now, nationalistic parties are not in power, especially that kind of crucial small party of Koštunica, but was always kind of really important player, and because there was half Serbia split on pro-democrats and nationalists, his party was always crucial, and he didn't come now in a ruling coalition, so I think that's a big opening and a new kind of air you can feel in Belgrade already.
Ed Viliame, let me ask you, what do you think suddenly changed in Serbia? Do you think, they knew where he was for a lot of that time, the security forces in Belgrade?
Best not asked to me. I don't know the answer, except to observe that it was a cynical calculation between the EU and Serbia that got him delivered in the end from his kind of new age hippie world, which didn't come as much of a surprise to me, actually. I mean, the man's self-delusion seems to know no bounds, but not the 13-year international crack manhunt of ninja leaping helicopter and all that boy's own crap. But I don't know the answer to that, except to say that
But there was a lack of will, wasn't there, over the years? I mean, NATO...
lack of will at best.
Yeah.
Jeffrey used the word compliance at worst, or at sort of worst, maybe even worse than that. But I think one of the things that's worth noting is that it was a sort of, the whole thing was a sort of celebration that the joint criminal enterprises have been called Serbia and the Republika Srpska all along, where during the war still are now. except the EU seems to think that it's all right. It doesn't matter what you are, it's where you are. There have been some interesting, just a sort of slight parenthesis, but a bloke called Mladić, who is in a cell, not a matter of meters away from Karadžić. He sums it up in a way. He's charged with the atrocities in a place called Visegrad. As Kamal suggested, we're talking 3 years. We're talking a lot of places here. Vlasenica. We're talking about Vlasenica. Highest proportion of people killed in any Obština in the whole of the country is in Vlasenica. Where are these places? But Lukic is charged with atrocities in a place called Visegrad. We're talking about taking people down to a bridge, about which a famous book was written over the beautiful Drina, slashing them up, shooting them as they fall into the river, maybe shooting them and chucking them into the river, and incinerating families, babies alive in houses, locking them up and setting fire to them, incinerating them alive. He was running a thing called the Preventiva at one point, which was doing drug dealing, smuggling, for Karadžić, to keep it all going. Which sounds like a good sort of underground criminal enterprise. Problem was that his cousin was head of the Serbian intelligence service, and Lukic had to go underground when he was arrested, and then he had a shootout with Karadžić's thugs. This is what we're dealing with. So, answer the question, I don't know. No doubt we will know, but the story seems to indicate that the joint criminal enterprise all along has been Milosevic's Serbia, Karadžić's so-called Republika Srpska, and now those two entities as they exist at the moment.
Kamal, for you, how important is it to get Mladić in the dock alongside Karadžić?
Well, obviously the job isn't finished. I think in many ways, well, for me personally, Mladić is more important than Karadžić.
Right. Why?
Well, especially in Bosnia, Mladić is more of a hero than Karadžić himself, because Mladić was he was running the army, and Karadžić, for many ordinary Bosnian Serbs, was just a politician. Even though for most of them he's still a hero.
So for you, Mladić is guiltier, if you like, than Karadžić?
Well, it's not for me to decide who's guilty. I think it's for the court to decide who's guilty. But you see, the reason I said Karadžić should have been arrested and Mladić 12 or 13 years ago, when I go back to my town, I see kids who are 14 or 15 sporting T-shirts with their images. They know nothing about the war. They know nothing of life that existed before the war. But unfortunately, as one of my neighbors said, they know what their parents tell them. So it's one whole lost generation. And I really hope. Well, I said when Karadžić was arrested, better now than never. So I would say the same for Mladić, because it might, give some hope to ordinary Bosnian citizens to move on. Because had it happened 12 years ago, Bosnians would have moved on much, much quicker.
Jeffrey, would it be harder to prove, or easier, to prove a case against Mladić, do you think, than against Karadžić?
I don't know. I suspect the evidence against both of them is extremely strong, and I can't say which one will be easy.
If you were prosecuting, you wouldn't have any worries. You think it's a relatively easy case to prosecute?
I wouldn't say relatively easy, but I don't see them as difficult cases, no.
Do you not, just tell us what you actually have to establish, for example, with genocide. Don't you have to prove intent? How...
Yes, but you prove that. Well, first, genocide is an interesting, problematic crime to allege. Created as a concept in 1945, made into the crime of crimes, put into the statutes of the ICTY and also the Rwandan statute and the ICC statute. There's a huge temptation to charge it, or almost not even a temptation, a pressure on prosecutors to charge it when they've got the most serious villain and they've got the most grave charges. Maybe not actually quite such a clever idea, because in fact the other forms of killing and the other forms of crime may be equally grave in reality as genocide. And by charging genocide, you're to some degree meeting a public populist expectation, which isn't necessarily such a good idea. And there are perfectly respectable arguments that would say it would have been preferable for genocide to have been left for something like Rwanda and not to have been incorporated in respect of Yugoslavia. Having said all that, it's in the Yugoslavian statute, so it's not surprising that both Luis Arba, in respect of the earlier cases, and then Del Ponte, whatever the state of legal advice she was given, insisted on genocide counts in these indictments. How do you prove it? Well, what is genocide? Is it the offence committed by a single individual on his own account because he has the necessary mental state to deal with and to wipe out a particular ethnic group in whole or in part? Or is it something bigger than that? And whatever the legal definition is, what do you, the public, want it to be? I suspect that after these various trials are over, and there have been, of course, trials of individuals, for example, in Germany, where one individual is found guilty of genocide in respect to a very low number of killings, or the Milošević case, which happened in 1992, where we didn't actually get a verdict in respect of genocide, but where Milošević himself had only been involved in killing over a 3-week period in a very small geographical area, and where the appeal chamber eventually said, yes, the case should have gone forward, although for devious political reasons it didn't. Is that what we really want by genocide? Is that what we want to reserve it for? Or are we looking at something much bigger? Well, if you are looking at something much bigger, you're probably looking at, within the confines of the Yugoslavia wars, Karadžić and Milošević. How do you prove it? How does genocide come to be committed? It comes to be committed not just by direct instruction, which you will almost never find, but by the combination of the creation of the appropriate environment by the political leaders, disturbance with the peace of the region in which these crimes are going to be committed, by the establishment of paramilitaries and all sorts of other things, by a propaganda process, and by having a society that has those who are in and those who are out. And thus it's very important, for example, in the Karadžić case, not to focus just on Srebrenica, but indeed to go back to 1992, and indeed to go wider to Belgrade, in order to see that combination of events and activities that create the environment from the top, in which people committing the crimes come to commit them in the belief that they will be protected from the consequences of their committing them, because they believe they're committing them in the interest of the political leaders. And it's those elements that you have to prove.
Can I say something? Well, it's very difficult to establish any sort of intent, but I remember being at home. I don't remember, I think it was late 91 when Karadžić openly declared in the Bosnian parliament, if you carry on like this, the Bosnian Muslim may disappear.
Absolutely.
And there was something else, I can't remember. Also, Karadžić proposed, when he proposed to establish their own state, he proposed exchanges of population, because as far as I can recall, there were only two out of more than 100 municipalities in Bosnia which had only two ethnic groups. Every other municipality had 3 ethnic groups plus others. And Karadžić proposed this exchange of population. He said, well, it's possible because it happened in Turkey and Greece in the 1920s. And then I also remember coming across this detail at the assembly in Pale. Mladić openly said this cannot be done without genocide. So this is not me, making these claims. As a lay person, I can see there's a lot of evidence out there to. And genocide is not about. I really hate these definitions. As a human being, for me, someone who dies in a simple massacre, this person's life is as important as somebody's life, as the life of a person who died in Srebrenica.
Can I just add something, Graham? In fact, 2 points. First of all, Campbell was absolutely right that some of the evidence in 1992 and 1991 at the Assembly sessions is extremely strong and indicative of the state of mind. He's also right, in a sense, to identify some of the things that were happening in 1992. There's a chap called Diego Arria, who was the chairman of the non-aligned group that forced its way into Srebrenica in 1992. And he said then to the United Nations, who he grew to mistrust or distrust, that this is slow-motion genocide happening. He said that 3 years before it happened. And no regard was paid to that. But what he was describing was a process. And although, of course, individual genocide may be committed in a very short period of time, it's probably more helpful and more important to look at it as a process. I'd be grateful for the views of others, as a process And that's what you have here. And that's why it's necessary not to confine this indictment to one incident here or there, but to look at that dreadful process that started with things that could be charged as genocide in 1992 and didn't end until, and this is another characteristic of genocides witnessed throughout the known genocides, the German genocide, the Armenian genocide, the Rwandan genocide, will not stop until stopped from outside, as this one was in 1995.
And also, if Great Britain and the US said back in 1992 it's genocide, they would have to intervene. And so no one was prepared to say it is genocide because...
Apart from Diego Ria.
All right, well, we'll come back to you in a minute, Kamal, because I want to ask you directly about your experiences in a moment. I just want to go back to Gordana in Belgrade. Gordana, can I ask you what was your reaction when you saw Karadžić in the dock today? And also, what does it mean for Serbia? I mean, the future of Serbia now. How cathartic is this going to be psychologically for Serbs, do you think?
I'm quite surprised when I found out that he was arrested, and that was the moment when I was really excited and I couldn't to go to court and come to Bosnia and let them know what happened, so they really let me know to some of my Sarajevo friends. Today, I have to say, this year really surprised, he became a very philosophical character, somebody you can't take seriously anymore. Calm man, somebody who is dealt with so-called curious headache, and in general, whatever happens, last 10 days looks quite pathetic, and sad that people like that could decide the destiny of thousands of people, and then to the end of the day, spend years like tricking poor old ladies in Serbia, so-called curing them from headaches. So that somehow after these new findings about his double life and who he is, today he looks quite, I was less excited about all events than I probably would if I didn't get all this information in the meantime. The Serbia is extremely important. And it's important not just to face because it's still being faced and will take time to face what happened in Bosnia. It's also important for the Republic of Srpska and for Bosnia in general, because let's not forget, we have now dysfunctional Bosnian state. And as such, we have the Republic of Srpska that appeared during the war and was totally is now almost about for itself, and independent state almost. And there is a lot of trouble and effort to the international community to make Bosnia functioning. Now, Karadžić trial and Karadžić actually possible sentences for genocide is actually showing also, will show what was the role of Serbian state in that war, because we didn't know quite clearly, because as we now know, he died, and we never really had the outcome of the trial quite clearly spelled out. So now we will try to find out what was the Serbian role. Probably the Republic of Srpska, many would question the difference of the Republic of Srpska, and you can already hear this voice there. And so that's important for Bosnia, that's important for Serbia, not just for the purposes of facing the past, but also politically, and again, border issue.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the moment, Gordana. Kamal, I want to come back to you because this is about victims in the end. It's not just about the legal mechanics of this trial. And as I was saying, a lot of people weren't around or were too young to remember the Bosnian War when it was going on. For those of the audience who haven't read your book, can you just give us a bit of an idea of what it was like when you spent those 7 months in the camps?
Well, I'd just like to correct you on my behalf. For me, it's far more important because of the international rule of law that is tried than because of what happened to me. I can't speak for others. And also, I mean, in the past we had people who murdered millions of people and never were held responsible for that. So I honestly hope what happened to me was such a long time ago. And when I was in the camps, I thought, well, didn't know whether I would live or die, but I believed I would survive. So I thought one day when I get out, this will happen to some other people, and I'll watch this happening to these people. And I'm saying it because I really hope that his trial will serve as a deterrent to any dictators in the world today against committing similar crimes, that they should know that they will be brought to justice.
But just tell us about life in those camps.
Well, I have to say I hate talking about these experiences.
Sure.
I'm fed up, but because I feel like a parrot repeating these experiences, talking about them. Well, we all lived in a mixed community. Life was good. We didn't have much money, but life was good. We knew who was a Serb, who was a Muslim, but it didn't really matter. There were so many intermarriages, not in rural areas, but in towns and cities. And Karadžić himself said sometime before the war started that Bosnian Muslims are closer to us Serbs than our brothers Russians. And I just don't understand what happened, because when I saw what was happening in Croatia, that was very close to home. And when it was happening in eastern Bosnia, I still believed, surely my neighbors will not turn against me and my neighbors. So my mother and my brother said, well, have a haircut and leave. And I said, no, I mean, we can't all leave. We've lived here for hundreds of years. We can't just leave. I was stupid. I should have left. And just to give you, which I think is a good example, I shared a school desk with a guy called Milan Milutinovic. And 2 weeks before my village was attacked by the Serb nationalist forces, I went to the Jamarska village and I spoke to him. And it was just a normal conversation, like nothing was going on. A couple of weeks after I ended up in the camp, I came across him in one of the corridors, and he was wearing his uniform, which he had at home at the time. And he carried his rifle, but he still talked to me as if nothing sinister was going on. And the camp was guarded by other former schoolmates, the policemen on whose protection I relied before the war. And at the beginning, these guards were afraid to look into our eyes because they knew we were guilty of nothing. And then the interrogation process started, beatings started, torture, rapes, killings, starvation. There was no method involved. When you talk about the Jamarska camp, it was not like a Nazi-style camp. And out of respect to the victims of the Second World War, Nazi victims, I don't like to make any comparisons. But, I mean, the brutality that took place in Jamarska is unimaginable. It was not about exterminating, detainees in Jamarska. It was about sheer pleasure in taking people out and doing these cruelest things to them. And that's something I don't understand to this day. A lot of people got killed. A lot of people disappeared. They are reappearing from mass graves suddenly. I really don't know why I'm sitting here and talking to you today and why so many other people were killed, because there was no rhyme or reason why somebody died and why I was left alive. And none of it, I mean, there was no reason for any of it to happen.
Ed, when you first went to the camps, it was just talk us through how that happened, because Karadžić actually approved it in the end, didn't he?
Well,
Kind of.
I still don't know why. But it's before, in parentheses. If there's one thing The Hague has achieved, quite apart from any legal, it is that, no journalists could cover that war. It was physically impossible, emotionally crippling. Is that the history that's come out of that blue chair, the record, and you're asking about Jamarska, but as I hope we've established, we could be talking about a lot of other places too, whose names we don't even know. Well, there's most of them, I know a few of them. things like the history of a much beloved doctor. His name was Iso Sadikovic. Everybody knew him. Apparently he was a totally funny man, and typically was picked out as part of the sort of the intelligence. You know, these things have a pattern. The Nazis knew them well, he would be called out not to be slashed, butchered, tortured, shot, but to administer to some of the Serbian guards who'd been fighting over various, the spoils of the looting. They'd patch them up after a punch. And there's a spine-chilling piece of evidence when a man describes the last night. It turns out actually to be the night, the evening of the day we went. And they call him out. This time, bring your stuff. And everybody knew what that meant. I don't know if he's been found or not. I think he has, actually.
Yes.
But Kemal, by the way, comes from a village called Kevliani, where 3 years ago, a mass grave of some 450 people were found. I was back there just before the weekend, and there's a field not far away where the terrain is short grass and hard earth, and there's this great round bit where the grass is long. The epic nature of the sadism, the viciousness of what was going on in Omarska, because that's what we're talking about, but in other places too. There was a woman who won a civil case, one of 8 in New York, for rape against Karadžić. Little discussed case at the moment, but could get interesting as time goes on. She witnessed the celebration of the night of St. Peter, for some reason important to the Bosnians. I don't know why. An orgy of violence, of shooting, slashing, incineration alive on tires. It's a sort of, I'm glad Kemal said this, this is not industrial extermination, but let's be careful, it is extermination, but it's where kind of, Millwall on a bad night meets genocide. There's a sort of drunken, one of the girls who escaped one of these houses in Visegrad, by the way, who I interviewed, her ears all sort of melting, was the only girl to get out of that house, where I think some 70 people were incinerated alive, and she described how they couldn't hear the screaming inside because they were too busy singing and boozing and playing music outside as this place burned. That's what we're talking about. Sorry, to answer your question, I have to be quick now, won't I? Karadžić was in London. He was on ITN. He said Roy Gutman and Maggie O'Kane had been talking to people about Omarska, Ternopilje, these other camps, Keretan. And he said, allegations all wrong. Come and see for yourself if you insist. And we did insist. And we ended up meeting with Parley, talk about that if you like. But what happened is we went down the chain of command over a period of 2 or 3 days. Evidentially, this is actually quite interesting. Seamlessly, his deputy, the local guy's deputy, the camp commander, into the camp. In a way, the Hague has gone back up the same ladder almost exactly over the last 13 years. Bless him for it, frankly. But that's how it happened. It was a challenge. It was taken up. I can say by ITN and myself then, in respect, that's how it happened. And
when you first arrived there, do you remember the moment you arrived? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, they tried to stop us. This is brief, but we were on our way from Priedo to the crisis staff, who, to their disbelief, were finding themselves taking us in there. They quite realised what the deal was, and I still don't know either. They staged a sort of mock ambush to stop us. They said there were mujahideen in the woods. Well, the Bosnian Muslims aren't very good mujahideen, for sure. They're much too fond of their pleasures of life for that. Of course, there was no so-called Muslim gunmen from scores of kilometres around. So this ambush happened, and then we went through the gates. Saw very little, actually. You read Kemal's book to find out what's going on, or you read the transcripts of a whole lot of trials that have been taken place to an empty press and public gallery. Ignored until sort of today. Perhaps we'll start scurrying through them now. But we saw very little of the skeletal men, and perhaps move on to this later. I've met a few of them again, just in the last few days. If I speak to anyone who hasn't read this 100 times already, I apologise. But yes, skeletal, terrified. Then bundled off to Ternopilje, barbed wire, rib cages. Talk of another place, Keretan. I'd never heard of Keretan then. Somehow it feels like either yesterday or the 16 summers.
I'm going to throw it open
Can I just say something very briefly?
Yeah.
If we, when we talk about Serbian nationalist objective, it wasn't to conquer and rule. It was in part to exterminate and to deport, to exterminate what they considered to be men of fighting age. And it was to rape our women, and it was to destroy our monuments. And I'm saying all of this because they thought if they did these things to us, we would never go back. Why did they bury all those remains in my village? 2 mass graves, more than 600 bodies, because they thought we would never go back.
Can I just say one thing before we throw it open? No, this is important. Just before we throw it open, in case everybody wants to talk about 1992 all the time, now, the situation right now, is that Olmaska is up and running. It's a mine owned by a man who owned more than Bill Gates a couple of years ago, called Lakshmi Mittal. He's Britain's richest resident. He's a non-dom, and he owns this place. There is no monument in Olmaska. The reason why there is no monument is, I don't know, Mittal can speak for themselves. But it's because there is no reckoning. There is no apology. There is a crazy waltz between denial and justification. But this is, as you say, just very quickly, they thought you'd never come back. There's a place called Karadžić, and it's hopping in the summer. It's rebuilt, and as a friend of mine said recently, every minaret says, we're back, guys.
No, but Ted, you're wrong. There is a monument. There is a monument in the Omarska village, but it's to their dead.
Yes.
And this monument even lists those who died by accident. And
Okay, just before I throw it open to the floor, I want to ask Jeffrey, before we do that, how important for international justice as a broad whole is it that Karadžić was captured and put on trial like this? In terms of alleged war criminals who are still at large?
I don't know how important it is for international justice. I think it's important for a whole lot of other reasons. You could argue that the justice system should be separated out from the political system, and that it's the political system that delivers people into a justice system. So his trial, it will be very valuable if it's done well, because that will raise the validity of the justice system. The importance of his being tried and captured at all is rather more a political thing. Infinitely desirable, but not my field of expertise.
Okay, let's throw it open, and we've got, quite a while to hear your question. So can you just wait for the microphone before you actually open your mouth? And to say your name briefly.
My name's Cleary, I'm from Mammoth. How much have these war trials cost so far? How many have been prosecuted? And would this money, where has the money gone? And would this money be better spent pursuing people who actually did the murdering and the killing in Bosnia? To my knowledge, they're still walking around.
Sounds like a question for Jeffrey.
I don't
How
have-
much does it all cost?
I don't know. I don't have the statistics.
Your exorbitant fees.
No, I didn't get paid anything.
Well, nothing. You do it for free.
No, I was just a UN functionary. I mean, I wasn't paid a special fee. It cost an enormous amount of money. There's no doubt about that. I can't remember how many hundreds of millions of dollars. I think it was estimated that certainly that the ICTY and I think the ICTR would each cost $1 billion. Is the money well spent? Who knows? Sorry? Well, it's who's had it. The UN has spent it on a large number of staff doing a large number of things. And like all big institutions, the ICTY is 1/3 populated by idle people who do as little as they can, 1/3 populated by people who do a reasonable job, and 1/3 populated by people who work very hard.
Sounds like the BBC. Actually.
Yeah, it's like any institution. It is not, it's very important to have this in mind, it is not an idealistic institution. It is not a particularly good institution. It is a corruptible institution. It's bound to be corruptible because it's unsupervised, it has no parliament, no government, and no focused press to hold it to account. So it's a corruptible institution of ordinary individuals who are pursuing, for the most part, their own careers. Nevertheless, it's on them that the money, by and large, was spent. Is the money worthwhile? because there are so many other people who are left running around, there were always going to be a lot of other people left running around, because an international tribunal like this could only ever deal with a selection of people. Was it the right selection? Too early to say. But one thing that this tribunal has done, well, it's done many things, but Ed's absolutely right, and it's a point that I cannot emphasize too often. The one thing this tribunal has done is not bring in results. It has brought in results. No doubt the results will be argued about for generations to come. And had Milošević got a verdict, that verdict would have been argued about for years and years to come. But in all the cases, a huge record of evidence has been laid down, both oral testimony and documents that wouldn't otherwise have been discovered or might even have been destroyed. And all that material stands for future generations, and it stands to stop the gainsayers. It stands to stop a future series of generations of myths, because myths will have to deal, first of all, with that record. Whether the record is worth the money, sir, I can't tell you. But
Okay.
in my value, that's
Okay, question here.
I had a question, just picking up first on that point about the money and the evidence. I think one of the most important things as we come towards the end of the trials is that that body of evidence in its electronic form is made available to us who have paid for it.
I agree.
Because it's the most well-documented case study of ethnic cleansing and genocide or crimes against humanity we've ever had. And at the moment, the evidence is only looked at in terms of guilt. And actually, the patterns of behaviour, the eliticide, the monuments, the arming and radicalising of the certain communities by local establishments and others whose tribe is also quite part of this, really could teach us an immense amount about how to prevent this, and also early warning signs for the future. So if you wouldn't mind just leaving your login on the way out, I'll do the rest. But the question was actually about evidence, because obviously the best evidence we have is the contemporary nature of the Republic of Serbia. Now, when the SAOs were declared in 1991, they bore no relationship to the shape of the Republic of Serbia now. The Republic of Serbia has no historical, geographic, or political precedent at all. It simply consists of what could be cleansed and held before the Americans said stop, and the 51-49 deal was achieved, which had been talked about for several years before. So, how is it possible? And this is perhaps a question for Ed to rant on as well. How is it possible that we can prosecute Karadžić for every action that led to the creation of the Republic of Serbia, but we leave in place the Republic of Serbia and possibly even accede to the European Union in a state of essential ethnic apartheid and corruption as it stands now?
Go on, Ed, have a rant.
No, I don't rant. I construct carefully reasoned mathematical.
Yeah, right.
No, there is a sort of. This pertains actually to the point about memory and how much people do know about what happened. After 3 years, and after Srebrenica, actually, there was an extraordinary brigade, the Krajška Brigade, based in Travnik, which was always, in terms of one's editors, I have to call it the ethnically cleansed brigade. They would come over the convoys over the mountains, either volunteered or perhaps less voluntarily to go to fight back home, basically. And they got to Prijedor with other people coming out of a thing called the Bihać Pocket and with Croatian army, which is slightly ironic because there were other things going on. They were finally allied, basically. And they were going to win. They were going to win the war. Every war turns. Second World War, Stalingrad, D-Day, this one had turned. And one of the terrible ironies is that the Americans intervened, got tough. The British, the French, and the UN weren't going to stop them all, but they did actually stop these people from going home. And in terms of Jeffrey does, it would have meant that all the mass graves would have been immediately accessible. Still not. But there would be one country, not two. So ironically, to answer your question, I hope this isn't a rant, but a recollection and an analysis, I think it's Paddy Ashton wrote in The Observer on Sunday, the irony is that Dayton, which is credited with stopping the war, and God knows how many politicians have written up their part about how bloody marvellous they were in doing it, actually constructed a treaty which has ensured the partition of the country, the destruction of the country. I mean, just an anecdote. A train from Ploče, down in the far south, to Zagreb, goes engine. I think it starts off Croatian railways, and it goes Bosnian railways, and a new engine, railways, Serbski, and then another engine back to the Croatian one again. And they want to join the EU. There are 3 postal services in Bosnia, and the stamp from neither one is valid in the other. That's not a country.
Okay. Another question. At the back. Lady at the back there.
I wanted to ask you about Richard Holbrooke, because you mentioned this a little bit earlier as well, but you know, the story that he cut this deal with Mladić and Karadžić, etc. What so struck me last week was Holbrooke was everywhere. So I guess my question is, can you describe a bit about what people claim Holbrooke was involved in terms of, you know, cutting a deal? And if he did do this, then why is he out there talking so much about, you know, why he's glad Karadžić had been caught after all these years?
Is that for anybody in particular?
Or politics.
Ed, maybe you want to go
I've ranted quite a lot.
You've ranted.
I'm not going to say very much about this, but I can tell you this little anecdote. I obviously wanted Holbrooke to be a witness in the case, and I only met him once, for about 3 hours, I think, of which 2 hours and 45 minutes was devoted to his explanation as to why I didn't want him as a witness. And I was able to get down to substance for about 10 minutes, of which 5 was devoted to sandwiches and coffee. He's a man very careful with his words, and you may want to really watch his words very carefully. I don't think he'll deny that there was an agreement. He may not explain the broadest parameters of that agreement. And that's what's got to be winkled out in this process or in some other process. There are some of us who don't think there's any chance of these trials uncovering what needs to be uncovered, and that we should be engaged in parallel in other processes which will uncover the broader truth, or at least will offer the opportunity for the broader truth to be uncovered. But I don't think you'll necessarily get it out of him.
The ego has landed. I remember it was the
Sorry?
What are the parallel processes?
Under development, but if you can't rely on a judicial process, and you certainly can't rely on an inquiry by the UN or the Dutch or the English or the Americans, because they've all got vested interests, you've got to develop a process which is essentially neutral, whereby you populate perhaps a library in cyberspace rather than a library on the ground, with the evidence, not the evidence, with the material that shows what evidence does exist, and then you try and engage in the process of finding it.
Another question at the back there, lady in white.
I just would like to bring into the picture quickly Radovan Karadzic, who at this stage is the second most wanted person from the tribunals of the in Croatia. With Karadžić and Mladić becoming such big symbols of what happened in the collapse of Yugoslavia in the war, and Croatia getting very close to the access in the EU, how important is now for the tribunal to get him as well, like Mladić, and how much pressure do you think the EU is going to put on Serbia in order to get him as well?
Anybody want to answer that?
Well, I'd like to see all these men arrested, regardless of what the motives behind their arrests are. I'm just a little bit skeptical that this arrest came very conveniently when Serbia is trying to join the European Union, and we're not talking about hundreds of millions of EU grants that will go to Serbia after this. But still, I'd rather see Serbia as a good neighbor to Bosnia than remain its enemy for the next 100 years. So I don't understand it, but I'm pleased to see at least what's going on. I hope it doesn't stop here.
Well, we're just talking about Serbia. Let's ask Gordana in Belgrade. Do people there now think that EU membership is sort of on the cards after this Karadžić arrest and appearance?
Can you repeat the question, please?
I was just asking, do people there in Serbia now think that membership of the European Union is actually quite likely now?
Yes. Do people here, do you understand well the question is, do people here think that now it's very so close to you?
Yes, that Serbia will now, you know, in the next few years get membership because of this arrest and possibly the Mladić arrest.
Yeah. I mean, I think that everybody understands it's not only about Karadžić, especially about Mladić and one more degree, but then it would be the biggest obstacle for any further trafficking of children. And I think the population looking at those recent elections actually opted for that. So EU is something that everybody is hoping for, being travel, even with the big situations, many young people plan to vacate, and we hope that some point the truth will come out more than it was until now. But yes, it is one of the biggest obstacles, and one is definitely we are there on that road.
All right, thank you, thank you. Right, question back there. Gentleman in the blue shirt. Yep.
My name is Mohsin, and I was an intern at the tribunal last year. My question is to Jeff. You spoke about the fact that the definition of genocide is essentially up to the public to decide how they want to apply it. But how do you think it should be applied, and do you think that Karadžić and Mladić should be charged?
When I said it's up to the public to decide, that was a somewhat generous statement. Of course, it would be, I'm asking you in a conceptual way, what do you think? And saying you can decide. The reality is that the statute gives a definition of genocide. It has been possible to bring several cases at the ICTY within that definition. There is clearly material available for both Karadžić and Mladić, sufficient to bring them within that definition to satisfy a judge for the purposes of confirming indictments. And therefore, I can't say other than that it's entirely appropriate that they should be tried. And don't forget, I prosecuted Milošević. I also prosecuted Milošević. Milošević was an interesting little case in 1992. Terrible case, the Serbian Adolf, who was charged with genocide. Didn't plead guilty to that, pleaded guilty to everything else. The judges behaved in an improper way and tried to persuade Louise Arbour to drop the genocide count because they wanted to keep it for a bigger fish. At the end of the trial prosecution case, the judges threw out the genocide count when there was plenty of evidence against him as a little single individual. And the appeals chamber said they were wrong to have done that, but they didn't order a retrial and so we'll never know whether Milošević was a genocide killer or not. So, in any case, there are lots of people who fall within the definition, and I'm not going to say that they shouldn't be tried.
Here at the front, mic down here.
We were in Belgrade, it was about 3 years ago, when that secret film was discovered that showed Serb atrocities, and it was shown on Serb television and also in Sarajevo, and caused an immense sensation, and people were talking about it.
Was that the film in Srebrenica?
No.
What do you mean?
Scorpions.
It's the Scorpions film.
Yeah,
Scorpions,
yeah.
Yes,
right,
yes.
I just wonder whether one can hope that this particular trial will have an effect that the other trials haven't had, to make more people realize what actually happened. Because people are still going around with a sense of victimhood rather than perpetrator in Serbia.
Well, what do you think?
And in all things. Could the trial have an educated effect?
I mean, sort of, as they might say in Bosnia, aku Bogda, inshallah, please let it. Because that point I tried to make earlier about reckoning, about this forgive, forget, move on nonsense that people are expected to swallow. forgive something that hasn't never asked your forgiveness because they deny they ever did it. So, I mean, that's how you get peace, is when the perpetrators of crimes in their general culture come to terms with what they've done. We've made this point in almost. It's not the Germans who are building the monuments. Sorry, it's not the Jews who are building the monuments in Berlin. It's the Germans. And that has made them, all things are relative, a fairly breezy, democratic sort of place, actually. I mean, compared to some countries. There's that the lack of reckoning is as big an obstacle as anything on paper. The fact that, as Kamal said, the monument at Dornopoli is to the fallen sons, right outside a camp where they killed people and raped. There isn't that sort of. I mean, every time you buy an ice cream in Serbia, the crossed Cs, which is the sort of the swastika of Bosnia, is on the bottom of that goddamn receipt. I mean, not even the Americans do that. I mean, it's psychotic.
Well,
one of the problems, just quickly, is what Gordana's saying, is that there is this thing of sort of, add instant European Union, and everything's going to be okay, like sort of putting Nesquik in a glass of milk, making chocolate. It's not going to happen. I mean, we've been in the European Union 30 years. It doesn't seem to have made much impact.
That's a subject for a different debate.
No, but it's just a point. This reckoning is not going to happen because you're in the European Union. You're not suddenly going to say, oh, sorry, we're in the EU now. I hope that somehow that film, this, Karadžić will somewhere down the line they'll realise that the music is the same.
Is your point that you almost need video evidence like that to bring it home to people?
I mean, just think about the Germans who did come to term and the Russians who have never been made to come to term with what happened in the Stalin period. And that's why Russia is in the mess. It's one of the reasons.
Can I just say, I don't think that this trial will educate people in general. I would love if that was the case. I think, for me, I'd like to see some of these cases entering history books. Even these cases where these men pleaded guilty, we don't have them in history books. We don't have them even reported in local newspapers. When you go to our municipality, my municipality, you get a sense that I'm the perpetrator. And these boys sporting these images of these criminals, they're doing it because their parents tell them that they are the real victims. So I'd like to see it done in a proper way, and through this trial, I don't think anyone or these people will get educated because there's this perception in the Serbian nationalist community that only the Serbs are being tried, and I don't know.
Okay, Jeffrey just wants to say something, I think.
The Scorpions video was something I deployed in cross-examination. It was then played. It reversed the conception of people in Serbia as to proportions. X% thought Srebrenica had never happened. Now they thought it did happen. Our perception was that within 2 weeks, the reaction had changed from, okay, so Srebrenica happened, but why is it it's only we Serbs who get prosecuted? So in fact, the processes of denial are both cumulative and varied. The other interesting thing, for those of you who are interested in detail, is the Scorpions video showed the killings of these unhappy 6 very young men. Whatever it is, 150 miles or 150 kilometers across mountainous roads away from Srebrenica. It also happened right at the end of July, and it was committed by Serb forces. This enlarged our understanding of the killing process that was Srebrenica. It's difficult to kill and bury one person. To kill and bury 8,100 plus, which is I think the latest figure, is very, very difficult. So we had evidence of an enlarged, we had evidence that it was a bigger process. I was stopped investigating the limits of that process from within the tribunal.
Let me just ask Gordana in Belgrade again. We were just talking there, Gordana, about how educational it is, the whole process of the trial, and videos like that Scorpions video. What do you think about that in terms of how Serbs will see this trial?
I I'm not sure that the trial as such would really cure that disease called nationalism. For a while, I think that there have been a very successful approach and really this kind of quality the public opinion on neither country in the Balkans, basically. So overwhelming feeling there in each country that somehow it's political tool and somehow it's always asking for the heroes of their own country. So I would say still in some countries that was part of this war what is considered as the war criminals are actually war heroes still in those countries. Still you can feel that in Serbia, you can feel that in Croatia, also in Kosovo. So I don't know why it would be probably good analysis to come to the point why they do not even succeed to really buy the tools of the common people, that I don't think there's quite a distance public opinion from the trial that's happening in the Hague. And only recently we've seen some local trials in Croatia that it became a little bit more close with the witnesses, with the victims testifying, and somehow closer to the Karadžić people. But that video was first shown here, and I remember it was a very big shock, and it did come as a kind of overwhelming feeling of really many people who saw that for the first time. So that video really did help, and I think media could really help for pointing all these events to the trial. The trial as such, I'm not sure that it's going to be followed. I remember the Milošević in the beginning attracted a lot of interest, so it was less and less, including the Bosnians from Bosnia, they started actually watching that. So I suppose that a tribunal is there to keep the track and archive documents for the future, and media should be there to highlight what happened and remind people of the crime.
Okay, all right, thank you, Gordana. Another question, sorry?
No, I was just going
yes.
to say you were 13 at the time, not 12.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dave. 14. A question at the back.
How long do you think is that the court will find Karadžić guilty of genocide, not just in Srebrenica, but in Bosnia, also in America too? And if it does find him guilty of genocide, what would the implications be for the international justice system of Serbia?
I probably shouldn't, and in any case probably can't, assess the likelihood of the conviction of someone in a trial yet to come, and it would be improper to do so. I can only refer to my earlier observations that there have been people who have been both indicted and convicted of genocidal crimes over the period that we're dealing with, and there's been Milosevic, who was found should have been tried to conclusion and not let out at half-time by the judges. As to the ICC verdict, the ICC verdict's a real interesting problem. For those of you who don't know the particular point that's being identified, the best series of documents that was available to us for Serbia's involvement in Republika Srpska, the best documents were provided to us, and a dodgy deal was done by Mrs. Del Ponte with Belgrade, whereby those documents were covered from public view, at least as to the best bits. The ordinary bits you can have, but the best bits, they're all blacked out. It was completely unnecessary to do this deal because there was no basis in law upon which the judges should have provided the protection to these documents that was provided. Never mind the detail, they stayed protected in the ICTY. When the ICC, the International Criminal Court, was dealing with Bosnia's state claim against Serbia as a state for genocide, they wanted those documents, or did they? What they did, the court, was to rely on the blacked out version of the documents. They didn't ask for the full version of the documents. Why? Now, the trouble is, I suspect that in the same way as the decision of the judges in the ICTY to allow these documents to be blacked out was not a politically driven, corrupt decision by the judges, but a combination of stupidity and incompetence. And I suspect that in the ICC, the decision not to ask for the full documents and to decide to proceed on the basis of the blacked out documents was another mishmash. In 20 years' time, how will it all look? Two courts acting on the same electedly limited material to reach versions of facts and legal conclusions that are arguably favourable to Serbia. How will that look? Conspiracy theories will abound. They'll probably be wrong. We must explore these things now and get all the facts, the underlying evidence, and the history of these dodgy deals and mistaken decisions uncovered early.
David, at the front, microphone. Is this coming? Be patient.
David Sells, member of the Frontline Stuff. In no way diminishing Srebrenica and what went on with the massacre and the rest. But I think the point now being made is we need the facts. It's history now. We need to know the facts. And those of us who are covering small amounts of this, we know that it wasn't just black and white. There was nastiness on all sides. I mean, Bosnian Croats and Bosnian Muslims were fighting each other for about a year, you know, all that sort of stuff. Serbs were thrown out of that frontier area, you know, massively overnight, all that sort of stuff. Also remembering that the First and Second Balkan Wars, way back, it's a part of the world which, you know, as I say, there's no black and white about it. Very nasty each side can be. Look at Ustasha in the Second World War to Croat. So it's just, from the point of view of history, we need to keep some sort of balance. It doesn't mean to say that Mladić in particular shouldn't be sort of hoisted up and hung from a tree.
Do you think, are you saying you think there's a danger that we're just demonising Serbs too much?
Because at Karadžić today, obviously we're looking at the Serbs, and there is a danger, and which, as I say, in no way diminishing Srebrenica or anything, because that was a butchery, an appalling butchery. But all sides were committing things of this order at different times in different places. And,
oh, this is rubbish.
What?
This is rubbish. This is an absolute rubbish.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Well, crimes were committed on all sides. We can't say everyone is equally guilty.
I'm not saying they're equally
but that's exactly
guilty.
what you're saying.
I'm not at all. I'm just saying, step back and look at the picture, and it isn't just black
I was born in 1968. I was not born in 1912. I was not born in 1941. We can't justify their crimes because of what happened 80 years ago.
I'm not justifying any crimes. I'm just saying that when you step back, think about the things.
You are diminishing these crimes, which happened very recently.
I think a return question might be in order. Where did Bosniak militias storm into Serbian villages on a massive scale, interning, killing, raping, and deporting in convoys night after night after night after night over a period of years? Where and when did that happen?
Well, that's the question you can ask.
No, I'm asking you.
Well, don't ask me, mate. I'm not here to answer questions.
Oh, okay, sorry. Well, I would submit that it didn't happen.
Can you just pass?
What's happened in Bosnia? Most victims are Bosnian Muslims, and most torturers are Bosnian Serbs. And those are the facts. What's now, 13 years after the war, where is the evidence that Bosnian Muslims have committed major crimes against the Serbs? There are some incidents. Yes, there are incidents.
Absolutely.
And those people have been prosecuted, and they should be prosecuted.
Yeah.
But there have been mass crimes against Bosnian Serbs committed by Bosnian Muslims, which is simply not true, and there is no evidence for it.
Jeffrey, do you think that the tribunal has been proportionate in the way that it's gone after war crime suspects?
There's a very difficult issue that arises in a case like this, where it's pretty well common ground that the larger number of crimes, maybe by far, have been committed by one particular ethnic group against others, but where all the other groups have also themselves, or many of them, have committed crimes. Should you say that we'll only prosecute the gravest crimes and, oh, by goodness, it happens all to be Serbs? Or should you say, as the prosecutor or as the judges dealing with these problems, we've got a mandate to look at war crimes involving all these different ethnic groups and these different parts of the territory, and we should set a lower bar for some ethnic groups, for example, Kosovo Albanians or Croats, and a higher bar for Serbs.
Is that what's happened, do you think?
Well, I think probably it's happened, but it hasn't been stated as such. Just to complete it, it would be a tenable position to say you should do that, because, of course, the remainder of all crimes, the intention is, that they're ever going to be prosecuted will be prosecuted on the territory. So it shouldn't matter too much. And if you as a war crimes court decide to be exemplary in relation to first Serbs, and then Croats, and then Muslims, and then Kosovo Albanians, but recognizing that it will be lower level crimes for this group than it will be for that group, that's fine, only if you do it publicly. The problem that the tribunal may have got into is that it's done this unstated. And it's done it with a will which has overlooked the state of the evidence, so that if you look around and you find who's been acquitted, it has been Kosovo Albanians. And certainly in relation to one of those trials, the prosecutor was advised by 3 sets of lawyers that there wasn't enough evidence. She overruled all those opinions and has run a publicity campaign to say that all the witnesses were murdered by Kosovo Albanians, demonizing them, and then in a book saying that that Albanians were busy killing Serbs after they'd harvested their body parts for sale in the Western market. Who knows what's the right outcome? The right outcome, I think, the right policy might well have been to have been differential in the way you prosecuted different groups who have done it publicly.
Okay, we've got 5 or 10 minutes, I think, remaining, so let's get through some more questions. At the back, way at the back, I'm afraid.
Hi, my name's Sandra. I'm a communications consultant. I just wanted to ask, obviously the Milosevic trial at the beginning, I think was taken off the air in Belgrade because it was actually winning support from Milosevic, and some of the first witnesses weren't very good. I just wondered, say that there had been lessons learned from the Milosevic trial, and that future trials would learn from that. I just wanted to know what those lessons are going to be and how that's going to translate into practicalities for this trial. And also, is he going to be allowed to run his own defence? Because obviously that will make a mockery, in a way, of the trial and allow these diversions into complicity of other activists and leaders. I just wondered if you think that there's a way to overrule his request to run his own defence, and what other changes might be made.
Well, Jeffrey, I'm afraid there's another one for you.
Let's try and deal with it briefly, because there's a really important point here, which you, as many of the journalists, I think, would want to think about. It's an easy pot shot at the Milosevic case to say that it was too long, it wasn't, it only lasted 2 years, and that it made a mockery of justice. The judges were actually very, very careful to ensure that Milosevic was able to do, within his right of self-representation, what he wanted to do. They gave him so many hours to cross-examine a witness, and unless he went completely off topic, they weren't going to say that this isn't relevant. They, by and large, let him do it. And he may not have provided the trial which you, as careful, knowing intellectuals, would have wanted to see, but he, exercising his right of self-representation, presented the trial he wanted to present. And that may actually be a fair trial. There's one other point you ought to have in mind, and it's this. If Milosevic had been represented by some urbane, silvery-haired, retired Supreme Court judge from America given special dispensation, he would have presented Milosevic as an intellectual, lawyer, banker, politician, facing difficult political decisions, doing things remarkably similar to some of the things that very respectable politicians from larger countries, which aren't vulnerable to this sort of tribunal, have done. What he did, by the way he questioned, the way he attacked the court, was to reveal his inner being, which we wouldn't otherwise have been able to establish. He actually showed himself up. He showed how it was that this man, with no previous criminality, was so coarsened by the processes of war that in 2000 he had Stambolic, his former mentor, assassinated when it became politically expedient. So don't fall for the easy proposition, which is very nice because it means you can judge one thing against another, that it was a mockery.
So as a prosecutor, you like these guys to defend themselves, do you?
I don't mind at all. And I think he actually did himself an immense amount of damage. But at the end of the exercise, he would have had no argument on the basis of fairness of trial because the judges had actually said, okay, you're an intelligent man, you want to run the trial. Put yourself in his position, not in a position of that, but finding yourself tried as an intelligent person, and you want to run your case this way, and the judge says, no, you can't do that. No, you can't establish it.
So they can't stop Karadžić defending himself, can
no,
they?
They can stop. Well, no, he's got a right to defend himself.
Yeah.
He has a statutory right to defend himself. I think they'll rein him in more. I think they'll make him try and behave more like a lawyer. They'll try and drive the issues between prosecution and defence to what those knowledgeable ones of us would want to hear identified.
What do you think his first question to David Owen will be?
I have no idea.
Okay, another question? At the front here.
Sorry to ask a rather naive question about reconciliation, I suppose. Clearly there will be people who hope that this trial, this successful conclusion, can aid reconciliation. Really a question for Kamal particularly. You talked about Mladić shared a desk with, and I wanted to ask if a successful trial might help him look this man in the eye again, whether he thinks about what made this man do what he did in the camp where he was held.
In the past, I've talked a lot about reconciliation because I really believe this cycle of violence has to stop. In my case, I say with me rather than one day, I haven't got any children, but one day if I have children, rather to teach them to hate so that they continue this cycle. I don't know how it's possible in this current climate. There are some brave individuals on the ground who have been doing a fantastic job, but with very little results. I mean, we have to keep trying, but
But can you have reconciliation without a trial like this?
Well, no. That's why I feel Mladić has to be arrested as well, because these are their heroes.
But
and if in court we prove that these people are guilty, then you can keep lying to yourself, but the record is there, that these people did commit these crimes.
But say Karadžić and Mladić are tried and found guilty, then can a line then be drawn under it?
Under what?
I mean, the war. I mean, is that when reconciliation can start?
Well, I always talk about reconciliation as being a process, and it's going to take a long, long time. But I say I wish it started 12 or 13 years ago, because every single day, we are losing so much. But it's, for me, the biggest problem is that when I go back to my former community, is that my perpetrators see themselves as the real victims. And I have forgiven those who wanted to kill me. I went back 6 years ago and I went after my secondary school teacher who interrogated me. He wanted me to forgive him then, but I wasn't prepared. And in January this year, I just said, well, I forgive you. Many people may find it really odd, but it's just like some huge burden fell off me. And which doesn't mean that every criminal should not be prosecuted. But how do you reconcile with someone who feels he did nothing wrong but is rather a victim? Unfortunately, what we have in Bosnia is not what we had in Germany after the Second World War. We had a process of denazification. The public was educated about what happened during those 6 years. We've got none of that in Bosnia.
Gordana, can I just ask you, in Belgrade, do you think that the many Serbs still feel that they are the victims?
Yeah, definitely. We just understand many refugees arrived here constantly home for the war with Milošević and Iran. But the fact is that they brought with them their own sad stories. They were not really fantastic accepted in Serbia. They struggled to survive here. And there is that feeling, overwhelming feeling that Serbia is the victim. When you think about, of course, Albania and Sweden, Kosovo partially, many Serbs were citizens here, from Croatia, many from Bosnia also in some parts. So yes, there is that feeling that everybody, you would usually hear everybody saying, well, but that was the war and everybody was killing everybody. So there is a part of denial that Serbia was with the regime and the army actually proactive and first to commit all those crimes. And part of that is all these refugees. But I mean, for reconciliation, if you ask me, we need to have finally sorted out some issues, and I don't think that they are still sorted out. It's not a fresh situation with Kosovo for Serbia. You have a very Kosovo announced debate against it. You have a people targeted here, coming to Serbia. When you speak about the Republic of Srpska, there is a very big nervousness there. And Serbs are in waiting, basically, in Bosnia to see someday future. That's the dream. So we have all these kinds of, somehow it's not to be expected that people are reconciling and saying, no, that's the past, let's go forward. They're still expecting something, you see what I mean? So part of that is an immediate awareness that Bosnia is actually not quite country that sorted all problems, and I hope it's not going to be some kind of conflict there at the end. But yeah, there is an issue with the Republic of Srpska there, and expecting someday to join Serbia.
All right. Time for a couple of last questions at the back there and here.
So we're not all that educated about what went on for those years. I think there's one more, we're not that educated, but I'm not. I think a lot of people are. We don't know that much about, and I think it's absolutely brilliant that this is going to happen. And I don't even know what the outcome is going to be, but I think it will be positive that it's going to happen. You know, that somebody's going to be brought to account. And, you know, it's not going to be ignored and he's been brought out of hiding. And I think the English people, we don't know that much about what went on. And it was on the news, but it was just not covered. It didn't catch our interest, and I just think it's absolutely fantastic.
Well, it's a statement rather than a question. Let me just ask. That's fine. I just want to ask Ed one thing, though, about the reporting of these trials. I mean, do you think, I mean, OK, we're saying it's educational, people find out a lot about what happened, but actually, do the media, I mean, maybe The Guardian does daily detailed reporting from a trial like the Milosevic trial or the Karadžić trial when it starts, but most of the media actually don't, do they?
No. Well, no, it won't carry daily reports. Well, I mean,
or anything like
somewhere in between the free wall charts and the Hague seas or whatever it is, it might cover it from time to time.
So actually, all this stuff's going on in The Hague, but people aren't really.
I think actually, in a way, that was a question, actually, and a very interesting one. In as much as, I mean, two observations. And one is, as I said, one of the strange things about The Hague and the reporting of The Hague is that there is a weariness. There has been, you know, every time you suggest a story about Bosnia, go ahead, get a life. Africa, Afghanistan, Iraq, and, you know, that's a fair point, actually. But this epic story, this extraordinary incomprehensible, as you've said, story has actually been told, and the press and public gallery has been either empty for the most part, or full of law students who are concentrating on something that Geoffrey understands but nobody else does, and not the extraordinary description of the enforced castration in Moscow one night, sticking a pigeon down the mouth to stifle his screams when he was done. But what's so interesting about your statement is that it is weird, actually. For 3 years, we did endeavour to report this war. It was reported. I mean, the siege of Sarajevo was on your screens monthly. No one could say we didn't know. We did know. And it was bizarre, actually, that this was in Europe, it was 200 miles from Venice, and it was on your screens most nights for 3 years. And it wasn't just that the politicians had decided that this was okay. It was the public that peculiarly didn't get involved. I remember going to to Rand, in fact, at campuses, universities, and you'd have sort of 4 people roll up. Now, 16 summers later, from Omarska and 13 from Srebrenica, Karadžić is not only in between the free bloody war chapter, but you know, the Sun actually had the main story, and good for that.
Can I just say, of course, when I was in Bosnia, when the war was taking place, I didn't know what was happening in the outside world. But when I came over here, and it was on television all the time, and very quickly I realized, well, these people will be able to watch these images tomorrow and have their serials. It's, people...
Were you angry with people, for example, in this country, for not being more angry?
Well, I can't blame them. I don't think I have any right to blame them. I wish they took more care of what was going on. This sounds like a cliche, but I believe if your human rights are violated in Indonesia, my human rights are violated right now, right here.
Okay. Question here. Sorry, there first, actually, which I did. Yeah. And then last, yeah.
I'm a bit dubious about the whole thing, really, because we often talk about Milosevic trial, this went wrong, blah, blah. There seems to be quite a lot of the tribunals gone wrong, and I'm thinking particularly of cases like the Dubrovnik and the Vukovar cases where people ended up fairly derising the sentences. One chap got 5 years for Vukovar. Had he faked his death in the canoe, he would have got a bit more. I just want to ask you, you say that there is a possibility that they might get it right with Karadžić, and that's what you all seem to be saying. Can I ask you, do you think they will get it?
Right, very quickly, because we're sort of running out of time.
Hope so.
So what was the question?
Do you think they'll get the right verdict with Karadžić?
Well, it's not up to me, it's up to the judges.
Okay. Geoffrey's not allowed to say, so we won't even ask him. Last question here, because Geoffrey's got to go back to Kent. Well, we've nearly done it anyway. Last question, so it better be good. No pressure.
I'm sorry if it's a technical question.
Oh. Well then.
But there's something a little bit unusual about this arrest, which is that Karadžić was arrested, if the stories are true, together with some evidence. We've heard mention of the news reports of parts of the military archive of Republika Srpska. We've heard about a computer and 50 disks with documents that he had gathered for his defense. So this is evidence that we have heard about. It is not known only to the experts. We don't need to ask General Mladić to carry it over. It's out in the media. So my question is, will access to this collection of evidence for people outside of the prosecution and defense be any easier in this case than it has been in previous cases?
No reason why, once it's produced, it shouldn't be available on the website.
Okay.
On the condition that it's produced as an exhibit. No reason why it shouldn't be available.
Okay. The lady, sorry, one very, very last question.
This is kind of about the Frontline Club, and it's kind of about journalism. The Frontline Club is great. It shows beautiful photographs. It previews extraordinary movies. It gathers together relevant groups of people to talk about issues of journalism. And yet, if I cast my mind back to the 90s and the reporting of the Bosnian War, my outstanding memory is endless journalists, some of which would be nameless, but one of them would be Martin Bell, saying how far this war is incomprehensible based on ancient ethnic hatreds, and don't worry your little heads about it because you'll never understand it. It's something they've been at for centuries, so just let them get on with it. And
no, actually, I think that's very unfair on Martin Bell. He certainly never said anything. I actually remember a great line of Martin Bell saying, can this be happening in our continent, in our time? It's ICTY. So I think that's a bit of a travesty of Martin, who's a very brilliant colleague, actually.
I accept your...
anyway, I think we need to wind it up.
And I place it against the memory of my own experience.
I recall that coming more from the politicians, actually, but there were a few.
There was a lot of journalism that said this is too hard to understand.
I think, to be fair to the journalists who were in Bosnia, including Ed, actually, a lot of them were screaming.
Well, I wanted to make an exception for Ed because I think then and now, his clarity about what was and what is extremely helpful to people. All I want to ask is, how far do journalists feed the problem by adopting agendas? How hard is it for a journalist to stand in the space and say, set your prejudices aside, set our own national perspectives aside?
We've got the question very quick.
How do journalists transcend the pressures on them to tell the truth?
Ed, very quickly.
When something like Omaska is staring in the face, with no difficulty, because it isn't. There's nothing complicated about this. Is ancient ethnic hatreds. It's people killing and locking each other up, raping each other. It's nothing complicated about that at all. Never was, never will be. When it comes to dealing with the editors, that's another matter. But we're not really editors.
Can I just say? As someone who survived, I'm actually rather pleased that not every journalist, I guess, was a good journalist, but I'm pleased that they were there, because I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. Because if it was up to the politicians, I certainly wouldn't be sitting here right now.
Okay. Well, I think it's fitting that Kamal should have the last word as one of... So, I'd just like to thank Kamal very much indeed for coming and baring his soul and bringing back some of those memories. Ed Viliami, Jeffrey Nice, very fascinating to hear your insights. And Gordana Igric in Belgrade, thank you so much, all of you. Let's just hope we're not sitting here in 4 years' time asking why the trial of Radovan Karadzic is still going on. Thank you very much. Right.